Welcome officially to the Advocacy Exchange. I am David Craig, the CEO of GRYT Health. I am a cancer survivor and a caregiver for my wife. December is Universal Human Rights Month, and December 10th is the United Nations Human Rights Day. We are incredibly grateful for you sharing your time with us to focus on the global impact of human rights. And I want to say a special thank you to our interpreters for being with us today, Rachel Goyette and Emily Koch. I want to take just a moment to reflect on the focus of human rights in this advocacy exchange so far. So since we launched and co-created this platform back in 2020, we've now put together and hosted 38 live sessions. And of these live sessions, 79% of the topics have focused on human rights. We've dug into and had authentic conversations around patient dignity, around health equity, around access to care, and around patient voice and representation. All of these sessions are available, and you can find more information on the advocacyexchange.com or the GRYT Health YouTube channel. They're all available anytime for viewing. And I want to take a second just to say a very, very special thank you to the 138 speakers and remarkable humans that we've had on these live sessions so far. These individuals have brought their expertise and their lived experiences to these conversations. And I think you'll see what really makes this special is just how authentic and genuinely committed these speakers are to these pursuits in their life and making the world a better place. I want to thank all of the advocacy organization members, your communities and partnerships for building this into what it is today. And a very sincere and thank you to Bristol Myers Squibb and the BMS patient advocacy team for co-creating a platform to amplify more voices. Okay, with that foundation, I have the honor of introducing our first speaker. Manan Shah is the Vice President, Head of Global Health Equity and Policy Partnerships for Bristol Myers Squibb. And what really struck me in our prep conversations and just getting to know Manan over the last several months is how much you bring not just the work and expertise, but the humanity to what you teach and how you help move us forward in humanity. So I hope everybody will please help me welcome Manan Shah.
So along with having this day job at BMS, one of the things I get to do that I really enjoy is that I'm a professor and I teach a few courses in Master of Public Health program, Master of Public Administration program, including issues in global health, social determinants of health, politics and public health, which is a very interesting one these days, and a few other courses. And so when Dave approached with this idea to speak, I was very excited because the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the UN was something that we covered this semester. And I thought if you'll give me a few moments to take a bit of a professorial starting point here, because oftentimes we celebrate these months, these awareness days, but we don't necessarily know the origins or the why behind it. And in this case, as we are looking to celebrate the 75th anniversary of the signing and the implementation of this Universal Declaration of Human Rights, it's worth just taking a step back and reflecting on where was the world back in 1948 when this actually came to be, because I think that really helps put some context into what eventually was put into this declaration itself. So at the broadest level, the world was recovering from World War II and the devastation that took place, not just in Europe, but in many parts of the world. And the declaration was the first time in human history that it spelled out basic civil, political, economic, social, cultural rights that all human beings should be entitled to. And this was a novel concept because, yes, there was a Declaration of Independence and a lot of other countries had put forward constitutions or these declarations. But this was the first time that at a universal level, at a global level, something was put on paper. At the time, there's only 58 members of the United Nations. And what's interesting to note is that while none of them voted no, 48 voted in favor, 8 abstained, and 2 did not vote. Now, if you look at the ones that abstained, it was Belarusia, it was Czechoslovakia, Poland, Saudi Arabia, Ukraine, Union of South Africa, not the current South African Republic we know today, USSR and Yugoslavia. So you see a lot from the former USS bloc that voted to abstain. And so what was the declaration itself? 30 articles, just about 1,770 words. And what's amazing, and I think this is what captured Dave's interest when I was talking, the term health is only mentioned once. It's not mentioned in the first few articles. It's not mentioned middle of the way. It's mentioned in Article 25, Section 1. And what the line says is, everyone has the right of a standard of living adequate for the health and well-being of himself and his family. And that well-being included food, clothing, housing, and medical care, and necessary social services. So health wasn't something that was really front and center in this Declaration of Human Rights. It was something that was put a bit further down. And if you look at the 30 articles, they were structured in a very specific way. The first one's focused on establishing individual rights, such as the right to life. Then it was about the legality of human rights. It was the rights towards individuals, towards the community. And then only later on in Articles 22 to 27, you get to this individual economic, social, cultural rights, which is where health is included. And again, this was in the context of a post-World War II era that was just starting to form. This was in the context of a lot of countries who were willing to throw off, the shackles of colonization, who were looking to become independent countries, who were promised, from the British Commonwealth, for example, if you fight on the side of allies, you would be granted independence. And so a lot of these political considerations had to be factored into the creation of this Declaration of Human Rights, because you had a lot of countries who were very interested in these socioeconomic rights. Right? They wanted to have this freedom to move, to work, to be gainfully employed. And there were other countries, quite candidly, a lot of Western nations that were opposed to the inclusion of these socioeconomic rights. You had individuals, for example, Hansa Mehta, who was the Indian representative, who suggested that the declaration should say all human beings are created equal and not all men are created equal, to have better reflection for gender equality. At the time, you had a South Africa that was, focused on or practicing apartheid. So you had the representative from the Republic of South Africa who was saying that the word dignity should be removed from the declaration because, quote, dignity had no universal standard. Well, he was afraid of, the criticism that would, of course, come to the South African government for the continued practice of apartheid at the time. But I think what it really gets down to is when you look at the two main themes of rights that were put forward in this declaration, there were two of them. One was social economic rights, and then the second was civil and political rights. And what's interesting is you have to view these sets of rights in two different ways. Social economic ones are not universal. There are standards to be attained and achieved. It's an aspirational goal of being able to have these rights, to be able to move freely, to have, economic employment, to have these. The second set of rights are civil and political, and they require protections from the government. It's a matter of putting safeguards in place to limit executive overreach, abuses of the government. And those are the two main contexts of the rights posed. So where does health fit into this, right? That's the question, because we're looking at this celebrating it 75 years down the road. And, one of the things I told Dave was if the nations of the world were to convene today and sit down, do we think that an actual declaration would be written? Like, could they achieve consensus and come forward and say, here's some universal rights we should all agree to? I'm skeptical of that. I'm curious to get your thoughts in the chat of could we achieve something today that was done 75 years ago? And then secondly, would health be included? Would health be mentioned more? Would it not be included? Would there be a specific focus on mental health and physical health? How would it be nuanced? But I think for me, what inspires me about the rights, about this declaration, and I love to turn it to the rest of the panel is this notion of the aspirational, this notion of what can be attained and what can be achieved. And if you look at health through that lens, what excites me about what GRYT does, about the Advocacy Exchange and the convening of all of you from around the world, is this idea of this focus on what can we do more? What can we do better? What can be aspirational for us to achieve? And I think at the middle of that, the core of that, the heart of that is humanity, right? Is the humans involved, because it's the health for them, for their families, that we're trying to work towards. And it's fantastic that something like this is enshrined in a universal document. It has no enforcement mechanisms, right? It has no punishment mechanisms. So a lot of countries signed on and said, yes, this sounds great. Well, happy to support this, because they knew there's no way that they could be punished or reprimanded if they weren't achieving all the articles guaranteed here. And I think it's fair to say, if you look around the world today, you know, how many countries are able to say definitively, yes, we are committed to all 30 articles that are in this declaration. But it led way to future, you know, country level constitutions. It led to the creation of an international human rights set of laws and processes that trickle down at the national level, at the local level, and so on. But for me, as just to wrap up, it's this aspirational notion. Is saying this is something that we should all have the right to, the ability to access. Then the question really becomes, how do we get there? How do we really achieve this as a reality for everyone around the world, no matter where they were born or into what condition they were born? So I think with that, Dave, hopefully I didn't bore the audience to sleep, but I'll turn it back to you.
No, and it's so important to know the foundation we're standing on so that we can create the future we hope to. I love your question, Manan. How about if we ask everybody in the chat, what do you think the percentage is today if the world came together and tried to write a Declaration of Human Rights today? Do you think it'd be 100% we could agree on it at the global level? 50%, 20%? I'm curious what everybody thinks. And please keep dropping in the percentage you think might be appropriate. Manan, your transition to Chris couldn't have been more powerful, because what you just talked about was the history of human rights at the global level. And Chris McCarthy, I've known you for almost 5 years now, and I know that you have dedicated your career and your personal passion in making health all about humanity and putting humans at the center of everything in terms of design and strategy.
Thank you, Dave. And yeah, that is probably the perfect transition. And there was a phrase you just used as well, which is create the future we want. And I would say that is that the entry point for me and what I do, and what I've been thinking about for 20 plus years. My background is public health back in the 90s. That got me really thinking about community health and how to make a difference there. And I was very blessed to join Kaiser Permanente in the 90s because it was big enough to attempt a more community-centric approach, but also tech was just starting to blossom. And so I had this incredible opportunity to blend the two. How might tech really change the way health is being achieved? And it, in some way, it was a big flop, to be honest. In those days, it was called business process design. And there was nothing interesting about it because you went into a black box, you tried to imagine how people would work and deliver health, and you would drop it off, they would sign off on it, and they would be so happy that you left the room because they would just go back to their old ways. I went on to get an MBA where I discovered design, and very specifically human-centered design, which I think has really changed the trajectory of what being patient-centered in clinical systems really means. And I'll say a little bit more about that in a moment. But it really started tapping into, how do we create the future that we all want? Should we be put into a system where we need to heal, or we're just trying to improve our health? And up until that point, I would say most health systems and most care delivery, most community health was attempting to be patient-centered, but it never had the tools to really figure out how to do that. And I would say, I'm going to talk for a few moments about what human-centered design is, and then I want to be really clear, it is not the end-all be-all. There's a lot of problems with that methodology and that way of thinking. But in essence, human-centered design is really trying to understand what do the humans of the system need and want, and then creating something that fills that need or want. And I think in the very early days, there was a lot of confusion between being patient-centered and being human-centered. So a lot of healthcare organizations would say we're human-centered, we're human-centered, we're human-centered. And we would try to design that way. And we very quickly realized that if you go to being patient-centered to its fullest degree, you can accidentally have unintended consequences, which is forgetting about the other humans in the system that have to partake and participate in whatever it is you're creating. So over time, we've been really thinking about patient-centered is a philosophy and an outcome. That is what we're trying to create, is that the patient is held in the system in a way that they can heal or be well. Human-centered includes the patient, but it's that everything that is created is desired and maybe even loved by all the humans who have to achieve that outcome of patient-centeredness. Not an easy thing to do, for sure. Now, let me just rewind really quickly, because one of the main challenges with human-centeredness, forget healthcare for a moment, is that there's an unintended consequence when you overly design for an individual. And we're seeing the negative consequences in a lot of the other industries of tech. And I know that they exist inside of healthcare as well. The most gross examples are social media. Those systems have been designed. Users wanted a platform, for sure. They said they wanted it. They wanted to be able to share in real time all kinds of stuff. And now, years later, we're seeing the unintended consequences of being overly human-centered. And so I think a lot of the industry, a lot of us in this space that have been thinking about this, there's two big things that are blossoming. One is a phrase that doesn't have a full definition yet, but a lot of us are exploring, being humanity-centered as well. So, and I think that's our job, is to figure out, how do we create systems that are not only good for the patient, the human, but is also good for the community and society simultaneously. And then the second big effort that has blossomed in the past several years is a whole paradigm of tech for good. So we create things, we design things that the consequences we imagine leave us in a better place than things like social media have left us in currently. So we're trying to avoid tech that hurts us, that addicts us, but actually adds vibrancy and health to our lives as individuals and to our communities as a whole. So yeah, maybe I'll leave it there for now, but I'm really honored to be a part of this, and looking forward to our dialogue.
Chris, I'm ecstatic to get into the conversational part of this. We have an audience. In your bio, it says you're a change rebel and healthcare innovator. That is this audience, right? We are all advocates, either personally or for people we love. And I love that we'll dig into what this means in terms of individually how we create the future. So honored to have you with us. Thank you. And our third speaker that I have the incredible honor of introducing now is Dr. Cindy Ho. And Cindy, we met 3 years ago, right at the start of COVID. And I know that you are professionally the infection control officer and medical director of research at Jefferson Health. And I can't imagine what these last 3 years have been like for you. And not only are you doing things to help people's lives and enhance humanity today, you're also doing it through this remarkably challenging time in human history. And so we are so honored to welcome you and to learn about your work.
You know, I like to be aspirational. Why not? I will say that on a practical basis, while we want to achieve 100%, I know that sometimes it's not possible. Can we get there incrementally? Yes. And I suppose what I've been doing is to start local, start basic, go old school. And sometimes we need helpers. We need advocates. My perspective might be different than other people, and it sort of aligns. Like, is this why I am where I am now? Who knows? You know, is there an invisible force behind all of what we do? Whether you go global, whether you are human centric, or whether you have the experiences of those who have the actual patient experience. So most of my life, I have had experiences with the healthcare world myself. Does that inform what I do, how I see things differently, how I feel it could be unfair for other people? Yes, of course. And does it inform how the passion, the drive could be different? I am an infectious disease doctor, and as such, generally, I would say that we tend to care as a specialty for some of the most vulnerable. That while we want to go global and impact people with HIV all over, sometimes it just starts with your community, getting basic items like food security, housing security, that, you know, just yesterday someone thought, are you my primary doctor? Because you seem to care more than my primary, kind of thing. And I was just like, you know, you're doing good with your HIV, but it makes more to think of you as a whole as well. And I think it also informs some of the work that I have done outside of the hospital. The hospital is part of the much bigger Jefferson system that's more well known in Philadelphia. I'm kind of really just in New Jersey, and it's called Jefferson Health in New Jersey, where my expertise is in things like antibiotic stewardship, infection control, and sepsis. And the thing with things like sepsis is that it's all about prevention, diagnosis, and treatment. But if you don't know what it is, and you don't know that there are precursors like infections and how to prevent them, then that's not fair. And so I have been the chief medical officer for Sepsis Alliance. And one of the things that we've been fortunate to be working on is a sepsis innovation collaborative through a grant from BARDA. And one aspect of this is talking to patients. At the end of the day, while we want to be fancy and develop things like devices to help detect signs and symptoms earlier, it's about starting local, starting with patients and seeing what is their journey from beginning to end. What are the sort of the missed signs and symptoms, and how can we overcome this more locally? And so I guess most of my work has been on a local level, but I kind of branched into kind of these bigger audiences, in part through these things like webinars, where I'm a very introverted person, but I can sort of spell out gospels, so to speak, via different forms. And through this pandemic, it's just sort of, I wouldn't say thrown into the area, but it was exciting initially, I have to confess. And that was because from an academic standpoint, oh, cool, I haven't seen this before, and it just turns out that I had the first case of COVID in all of South Jersey who was hospitalized. Who knew? And so the experiences I have, that in spite of my own afflictions, I totally just went old school. Okay, At the time, there were kind of some periods of time where it was very risque to go see these patients. I just went old school, too bad. Just go in there, wear your personal protective gear, and just go to the bedside, go old school, talk to the patient. And one by one, you can achieve these things. Now, on a global level and the aspirational component, it really makes me want to get on the inside and talk to somebody from the World Health Organization and kind of point out from an advocacy standpoint that, hey, this is our proposition. Let's write one, and who can we achieve this aspirational goal to just write something that is achievable, or maybe it's even aspirational, but you have to start somewhere. And I'll pass it back to you, Dave.
So powerful, Cindy. And I love in the times that we've talked how much you've brought your experience and how much that informs the work that you do. I know that when I was going through cancer diagnoses, I didn't see that that was happening. I didn't know that people were that human in the work that they're doing. And so I hope our audience gets to feel how much the people who are change leaders are really bringing their whole humanity to this work. I would love to just dive right into a conversation. To me, what makes listening to this and who we are together as a group right now really remarkable, how truly cross-stakeholder and cross-cultural this gathering is. Menon, we've got medicines development and access here. We've got health systems and care delivery here. Chris, you talked about tech for good and delivery through new digital approaches. And our audience are all change rebels too. We are all here because we believe a better future is possible. And so, Menon, if we can start with you, when you think about aspirationally what's possible in the future, we have a group here together that wants to be a part of creating that change. Where do we want to start to think about our role as humans in moving towards a more human focused approach?
It's a great question. I mean, I earlier in my career and even now with college students, what I love encouraging them to do is finding the power of their voice. Previously, I trained patients and caregivers to be advocates, when they go and talk to elected officials. The biggest concern or fear I hear from them is, oh, well, they're going to look at me like, who is this person? They don't know what they're talking about. I'm not as smart as them. I've met many elected officials. I wouldn't make that assessment so quickly. But, what I would say is, be empowered and proud of the knowledge and expertise that you have, because you are the expert. You're the expert of yourself, of your family, of the care that you provide, whether it's to a child or another family member, and use that to make your voice heard. And I think for me, the biggest way that you can have that is get involved, be engaged, right? It's oftentimes, oh, my voice doesn't matter, I'm just one. What has encouraged me, whether it's been here in the US or when I've lived and worked abroad, is the passion when people come together and create a community of like-minded vision or thought, or even sharing the same fears or concerns. There's something incredibly powerful when you talk to a community of similar folks going through something similar, of saying, I'm not the only one that feels this way. I'm not the only one that's experiencing this. And there's something liberating about that. There's something that makes you say, okay, I don't want to say normal, but a sense of relief of, okay, I'm not the only one. And for me, it's when you get together, when you have that collective drive and that sense of, here's something you want to focus on. And change is hard. I mean, we're all, change agents. And I think we can all, agree that change is hard. Sustainable, lasting change is going to take time. It's going to take energy. It's going to take setbacks and frustrations, but not to be deterred by that. I mean, the pace of, and I view this from, what can you do at a systemic or regulatory or policy way? Because there's things that you can do at so many different levels, and I'm sure Chris can talk to that, and Cindy can talk to that. But if I view it from this lens of what is change that you can bring forward, these legislators are not experts, right? They have to deal it. And what I always say when I talk and explain to people, what do I do at work? Because most people, including family, have questions. Legislators have to deal with a huge variety of different topics, right? They have to deal about agriculture and education and security and defense and health and so on and so on and so on. You can't expect them to be experts in every single thing that they're having to vote on or decide on. And even if they have a huge staff of legislative aides or experts, they still need to hear that individual perspective, that individual voice, right? They need to understand, here's what this legislation you're discussing or this policy change, here's what it means for me. Here's what it means for my family. Here's how it's going to impact me on a day-to-day basis. So for me, bringing about that change, being a change agent, bringing the humanity into this is really finding the power in your voice and knowing that when you speak, people are going to listen. You will be able to make a change and an impact by being your true authentic self, by bringing these perspectives and insights forward in a way that people will listen. So that's what I would say.
Powerful words, man. And, I spoke to a patient yesterday and he's like, oh, you mean I'm not going to be a global leader? It's like, no, but I know there's kindness in you. I know that you look out after people, and without you, there's definitely people that depend on you for some very basic things like food and your guidance and wisdom. And then this gentleman offered, oh yeah, I used to go along with my father and we would collect foods from different stores and we would just give it to, the pantry and give, some food security to other people. I'm just like, wow, so you can aspire to do great things, but you can then think about it in ways that impact, find the gaps where you are. I recently came across with others the opportunity to write grants. The thing is that if you want to make change, sometimes you need money to do that. But if you're not given money, how do you do it? Well, you either try to find a sponsor at an institutional level, or you go out there and just try to write a grant. And to be totally truthful, I've been trying to write grants for like 10 years and just crash bailed all the time until finally one day, just recently, we got awarded from the Office of Minority Health through the Department of Health and Human Services a grant to help to address a very space that I had not previously really thought about, which is those who have limited English proficiency. And what we're going to do is, when you talk about equity, diversity, inclusion, and sort of at times it just becomes equity, diversity, inclusion, kind of gets in the background sometimes, but then to actually be able to be given the grant and to work on just simple, basic things. We just want to educate those who are in our community, and I'm just learning some things like what is the social vulnerability index, which means that, items that look at housing, poverty, whether the housing is crowded, whether somebody owns a vehicle, etc. And then looking at things like zip codes in our own backyards to see which are the communities we can specifically target to let them know that interpreters are available, and that if they come to our hospital, we're going to educate them about topics. And so humanity can be grand, it can be local, it can be whatever we choose it to be. And don't ever underestimate the power of you, or in the chat. I love the chatter because there's been capitalized letters of community, and we can do this, and surely I so agree with that.
I just like to jump in here, build on a couple of points. And this is building a little bit off of what Manon was saying a few moments ago about our role in what we build in our health. And for so long, there has been a paradigm of being asked for feedback or being invited into participating in whatever it is we're trying to create and get to the next level. And I think a shift that has been happening over the past 20 years and has really exploded in the past few years is not being invited or being offered to give feedback, but to be the co-creator or owner of what is about to be created. And it's kind of a psychological flip in the brain when you go from somebody who is offering feedback or feeling like you've been invited to the table to you're the owner and creator, and no one's inviting you to the table. You are at the table. And it may only be your own personal psychological flip, as you approach these conversations, it may actually make you a little more demanding in some ways. And I think that is exactly, I think, where we all need to show up. But it is changing the way we design and create things, because the roles that we have in healthcare, whether it's improvement, product creation, design, it's now about being great facilitators of those who are now creating. And so anyway, there's a beautiful movement that's happening. We're seeing a lot more ownership and demand for ownership. And I think that will really take us to some exciting places. And then just one little example I want to give you, because I think sometimes people kind of forget like what policy is unintentionally or intentionally guiding so much of our lives, and we don't even realize it. I did a project at Kaiser Permanente exploring the transgender care experience and really trying to think through like what were the challenges. And at first, when we did this work, we thought this was about creating a better transgender care experience. Like we literally started tinkering on the edges. And what our transgender community started helping us understand was that is well-intentioned, but the main issue is policy. And the main issue is that most insurance plans default transgender care to be off. So if an employer wants to offer this, they have to explicitly ask for it to be turned on for their employees. And so all of our work, all of the work that our transgender community did with us was to build the confidence and the strength of executive leaders at Kaiser Permanente Insurance to just change a button. And the button, that's all it was. The button had to go from off to on. And it still meant that businesses could say we want it off, but we also know psychologically that's harder to do, to ask to strip care from somebody as opposed to gifting care to somebody. And so I think I think it's a great example because we forget that some policies are a single button on an electronic dashboard that is either defaulted on or off, and it's driving massive care across the entire country. And so Kaiser Permanente was the first insurance plan to default on in the nation, and immediately 11 million members had care that was not possible before. And that's a policy and a very humanity-centric approach, I think, to design.
You just spoke so powerfully to, man, and you said, finding the power of your voice and making your voice heard. My career, I started as a researcher, and I always felt like we designed the research questions to get the answers we expected, right? And thinking about what we're trying to learn from the people we want to really support is such a shift in terms of not going out to get the data we want to get, but understanding the human and their lived experience. I want to take that, Chris, and give a special thank you to our working group leaders in this advocacy exchange. Sheila Thorne has spent her life doing this work, and she always says it's not that people are hard to reach, it's that they're hardly reached out for, right? And how do we do this work to reach out together? And the work that these working group leaders, including Neil Bertelson, Gary Nolan, and Dr. Brad Love are doing is to design principles and best practices from the lived experience. And so I would invite everybody that's here with us today to be a part of that next year. So at the end of this, we're going to ask for your feedback, your lived experience, and we will follow up with you what we learn, but more importantly, how we design these from the lived experience of them living them. So you just inspired me, Chris, with what my journey has felt like, and I hope this movement that we're all heading towards.
For me, it's this conversation just makes me reflect on what is the concept of an expert, right? We give these labels to people and assume they know best, they know everything, and who are we to make them reconsider? And I reflect back to a previous role I had when I worked for a medical dermatology company, and we were at a patient conference and listening to a few patients and caregivers speak. And this one mother had a great story she was sharing with us of she had enrolled her teenage son into a clinical trial, and she lived outside of Detroit, and it was about an hour or so to go each way, to go and come back. And her thing was, I have no problem doing this. If this can make some change, if this can help getting something to the market that can help other children, I am all for it. But why can't I know what the results are? And she just had this open question. And Chris, I reflect back to what you're saying. Sometimes we put labels of, is something patient-centric? Take a step back, is something human-centric? And what she's asking was a very fair question. You don't need specifics. You don't need to know what happened, to your individual son or yourself if you're participating in a trial. But shouldn't you have the right to know, and going back to universal rights, shouldn't you have the right to know that if you're committing your time, your energy, your interest into something, to at least know what it resulted in, what it yielded? And what was fundamental about this was it did lead to wholesale change. We went back into our company and talked to our regulatory and medical colleagues. And you have to start breaking down these walls, right? Their initial response is, oh, no, we can't do readouts of trials. We can't do that. And it goes, no, you're not listening to what this mother was saying. She just wants to know, what was the result that her child contributed to? You don't have to know the specifics, but wouldn't it be great at the end of this trial concluding, all participants receive some summary, some notice of, hey, here's what happened, here's what this means, we're able to move ahead because of the contributions that you and your son provided. This is a product that eventually will be on track to go to market, or hey, it failed and here are the reasons why. And it just, again, goes back to saying this point, everyone is an expert in something, right? Everyone is knowledgeable about something. And again, when you find the power of your voice and you're able to articulate that, it can move mountains. And I think as a society today, we tend to be very impatient. If something is in 30 seconds or less or whatever, we tend to give up or get frustrated. No one said change was going to be quick. No one said it was going to be easy, but that doesn't mean it can't happen. So again, I think back to that a lot, and had a chance to reconnect with that mother about a year and a half later. And I was able to tell her, what we were able to do based on this conversation. We're able to go back into the company and change our protocols. And I don't know what the reaction I was expecting was, but she looked at me and she goes, well, yeah, that's what you should have done all along. And I was like, yeah, she's absolutely right. So let's not pat ourselves on the shoulder for things that we should have done from the beginning. But it just, to me, shows you can make a change even as one person. And it's a story I always think back to quite fondly.
When I see patients in the hospital, I take the time to not just sort of write down the risks, benefits, and alternatives, but to actually discuss the risks, benefits, and alternatives. And I realize sometimes that though I spend time with patients, sometimes I need to spend even more time and do the so-called teach and teach back, where they tell me back, do they really understand or comprehend? And I think more recently, I've just been learning. It's fascinating to be learning in this day and age. But if you don't know, then you can't possibly be informed to make a difference. So for instance, I've recently connected with individuals in the IDD space who are intellectually, developmentally disabled, and just learning a ton. That when they could be scared or sick or something, their manifestation might be that they start laughing as a sign of nervousness, for instance. And how do we connect to people who might have challenges in other ways? Not only do they not speak English as their first language, but then on top of that, they have some sort of intellectual disorder. And this was fascinating to me because yesterday or the day before, the days are blending, but the concept was, okay, if we go out there and educate people about things like medical Spanish, what about me? What about that group that could still benefit from this, but maybe they just can't read things on a page? And how do we reach out even more? So it's really taught me to look about just really at a basic level. Do we think that this person understands? And And so while it's been local, we can do things statewide, nationally, and more. And, you know, just all of this conversation is really resonating with me. So thanks for being part of this panel.
A huge connective thread through all of this. Chris, I know we met from some shared work in young adult cancer, and it wasn't until 2006 or 7 that young adult cancer was even a specialty or a known entity, right? You were either a pediatric or everybody else. And if you went through cancer in your 20s like I did, fertility wasn't part of it because most people getting cancer aren't worried about fertility. And you mentioned the transgender human experience, how little we really know and have spent time really welcoming those conversations to make really human impact. And the fact that we have leaders like this changing the paradigm gives me hope for a better future, right? Does it feel like that to be in that position? What does it feel like?
It is sometimes overwhelming, but mostly I'm honored to be part of the journey. And I think starting to recognize what is our role, and I started scratching at that just in my last when I was last sharing about being more facilitative than I think where most of healthcare has been, well, almost forever. Like, we're the experts, we know what we're doing, and you, the patients, are sick, and so we know better than you. And we're seeing in several decades, but definitely the past 2 decades, a quite a big transformation. And so I think for me, I'm on my own learning journey, and I'm honored to be centered with patients. I'm a patient too, but centered in their journey and trying to get to less extractive ways of being. And that is, again, getting back to this, that I don't even like the word patient here, but I'll use it temporarily, that the patient is the owner of the system. They're the owner of themselves. They're the owner of their health. Now, for many reasons, and Cindy was talking about this a moment ago, there are many of us who have different levels of ability to interact. And I think that's where system design and humanity design needs to really fit in and meet each of us where we're at. And so to me, this is some of the most exciting stuff that we need to be working on together.
I feel all of your authenticity and what each of those words mean. You live that, and you're making that the future.
I just wanted to acknowledge some of the comments in the chat about talking about that patients are not always comfortable. They may not feel willing to express themselves. And that's very true. And that comes sometimes through time, and sometimes it will never come. But this is the reason that as we develop trainees, or we are mentors, or we teach others, this is on a lot of us to tell people how to connect with patients who are not just patients, they're people. And we need to talk at a people level and not use these fancy smancy terms and break it down sometimes into just very basic items that, you know, and so, you know, this is sometimes more challenging than we think it can be. And it's not just about physicians, but these days there are also advanced providers, physician assistants, nurse practitioners, and more. And we need to look at this in a different way. And it's really so critical. So we make that basic connection and trust. And, you know, there are times that when people are ready on a different level, that when people are ready to share, it could be very enlightening, and they can become powerful advocates whether it's merely a simple story on a page or much more than that. And to be able to harness that when someone is willing is beyond the power of 100. And it can be amplified. And so we can never forget that.
Cindy, you just spoke to a major change in the healthcare infrastructure around patient experience and the patient-focused drug development initiative that's only now 10 years old and only now less than 6 years since any guidelines came out. The GRYT team, I'm very honored to share, was in the Lancet Oncology last month. If I can ask our team to share the link for anybody that wants to read that. But it's an introduction to what patient experience really is, which is our voices. And Dr. Brad Love, my co-founder, the closing words to this article I want to share because they're his. We treat experiences with the same respect as we treat data. By definition, experience is something we learn by doing. Everyone in the development of new medicines and access to care can do more to support patients and caregivers in talking about their experience and inviting them to use their voice when appropriate for them to improve medicines and more complete care. We have to invite people to this journey. And I think that's what you're saying about us being more open. Manan, one of my heroes is Dr. Janet Woodcock at the FDA. And she said when this was released, it's clear you have to start with an understanding of the impact on the person who has it and what they value most. And this is from the deputy chief of the FDA. When I think of leaders in roles like this, I think about a better future. What does it feel like to be one of those leaders in your role?
It's there's days where you don't know if you're a leader or you're just following and listening to others. But I think for me, if you're in a vantage point based on where you are, the title you have, or the knowledge you have a responsibility to pay it forward or to do something with that. And I've seen or tried to do that. One of the reasons I love teaching so much is that notion of paying it forward and helping that next generation of leaders know what they need to do. And the way I approach the courses that I teach is I try to do it from a very real world perspective. You can talk about the abstract or the theoretical or the definitions, but I'll tell you this, in most engagements I have, no one is citing the Wilson principles on administration or, whatever the case may be. And for me, probably the best compliment I can get as a teacher and educator is not, oh, your class was so easy, or, as much as the students want to have an easy classes, your class made me think. And your lectures really made me reflect. And I, for the MPH program, I have some PharmDs, MPH doing a joint degree, or just some MPHs. And what always amazes me is without fail, every class there's a PharmD student who comes to me and says, I've never thought about the health field from such a big, picture perspective. I'm talking, in my courses, I'm learning about pharmacology and interaction of drugs and so on, but I've never really sat and thought about what that role plays in the broader health community. And that to me is fantastic, because that to me shows that as a leader, you're helping people become those change agents. You become a change agent when you realize that there's something that can be changed and you have a way to help influence that change. So that's how I would view that responsibility. But I'm curious to hear how Chris or Cindy take it as well.
I mean, it's always really great to be able to be a mentor, or not to have known that someone considered you like a mentor, and it's very powerful to be able to influence future folks. And sometimes you need to draw things from people and harness their ability or hidden talent, so to speak. And I think that you can never dismiss the power of a simple lecture, a simple one-to-one conversation. You never know who might be inspired. Sometimes you don't know, especially in a Zoom, like, who's inspired by this? I don't know. We can't see reactions, but we can see heart emojis maybe. So maybe this is resonating. So, and it just leads to more conversations, which is at the end of the day, one of the simple things that can come out of this.
Good trouble. you know, this idea that, you know, we should all be rebels. And to me, when I see more and more people claiming the title of rebel, healthcare rebel, I feel like I've done one more thing that I can be slightly proud of.
Dr. Cindy, Chris, and Manan, to thank you with all of our whole hearts for how you are making the future better. It has been an honor to spend this time with you, and we're so grateful. And I just want to end with a huge thank you to everybody that has made this Advocacy Exchange what it is today, all of our advocacy members and organizations, and the patient and caregiver community, and our partner Bristol Myers Squibb for co-creating this platform. It has made me a more whole human, and I hope it has a similar impact for everybody.